And when I found about the Four Seasons, there was no gauche, there was no brands thrown everywhere. You know what I mean? Like what you're seeing on Gucci clothes everywhere, or all these things that call themselves luxury. The Four Seasons is understated. It has a simple logo, but you go in there and there's no bells and whistles screaming, "We're fancy."
Yes.
It's this quiet delivery.
We stay in a Four Seasons in any city that we're in because the experience is so above and beyond. Like every time we stay at a Four Seasons, it is a masterclass on branding.
The wealthy think more in terms of time and convenience, like when they have more than enough money. And so people didn't understand that by providing an experience that was so accommodating to what a wealthier traveler wanted and needed, they were actually making their life so much better that the price point didn't matter.
No,
What a brand, what a brand, what a brand, what a mighty good brand. Say it again now. What a brand, what a brand, what a brand, what a mighty good brand.
so we are currently rebranding one of the original Four Seasons buildings. And I've always been obsessed with the Four Seasons brand. So I recently finished the autobiography of Isadora Sharp, who is the founder and CEO of Four Seasons. And I really wanted to do a case study video on the Four Seasons because luxury's in a weird space today. It's almost, I feel like they can charge an expensive price tag and they can get away with calling themselves luxury, but that's not what the Four Seasons is. Mm-hmm. It's luxury it's a world class product.
It's almost like we need a new term for luxury because it's been co-opted by by giant corporations that are taking advantage of people who want to appear to be wealthy. And so they're essentially just taking all of the money of people who don't have money.
Yeah.
So that they can appear to be wealthy and calling it luxury, but luxury is actually world class.
Yes.
Right? It's not just a label thrown on something.
It's not just good packaging, right? And I was struggling with trying to explain this in the book right now that I'm writing, and because I'm obsessed with when anything is done at the highest level, but it has to be earned, right? And we stay in a Four Seasons in any city that we're in because the experience is so above and beyond. Like every time we stay at a Four Seasons, it is a masterclass on branding.
Can I try to explain it from my perspective? Because for those of you who know my background, like I spent well over a decade in the infantry, the airborne, and some hardcore units where, I ate dust for breakfast. Right? And so it's one of the things we laugh about is I was never like a luxury guy, but when you get in special forces units, you really value high-end kit, like stuff that helps you survive. And so it has to be world-class because you rely on it for your life. But I found like when I transitioned into business later in life that I resisted luxury. Mm-hmm. Like you were like, hey, let's do that. And I'm like, that's a waste of money. Like I just need, but I find myself almost getting annoyed at myself because when I go into a Four Seasons, they always over-deliver. And I want to say this is nonsense. It's too expensive.
A waste of money.
I want to say it. But I can't actually say it, even though it is quite expensive, because they execute at every level like a special forces team.
It's mastery.
On the service. Like they execute like Navy SEALs in the delivery of what you kind of want when you get there. And I look at the people, I'm like, how are you getting these human beings to be so professional and so good where everywhere else I go that charges a lot of money, the employees don't give a shit?
Yeah.
Like, anyhow, it's that, I think it's that executional service.
You're a perfect example of it. And like, I struggle to explain it as well because it's an experience. And if you're someone that loves marketing and you love branding, you have to in your life experience the Four Seasons. And you're a perfect example of that because we were in Costa Rica and I brought you to the Four Seasons property to go for dinner. And there was a resistance for you and the idea of what Four Seasons was in your mind. And it was just an overpriced hotel. And the story of the Four Seasons, how it became so exceptional is because hospitality at the highest level, the 5-star experience, is mostly just overpriced, right? It's not that much better. Like the accoutrements, like the accessories, like it can look nicer, but it makes you feel icky for how much more expensive it is than a Marriott. Whereas the Four Seasons is not that. And you saw that at the Costa Rica, their Papagayo property, and you were blown away. And I think that's when you became fully converted. You got it right away.
And if I can keep along the theme, it's like when you're like with the top guys or girls in the military, like in the elite units, they're not showcasing brands, right? They're just, if you know, you know.
Yeah.
Right. And what I found about the Four Seasons, there was no gauche, there was no brands thrown everywhere. You know what I mean? Like what you're seeing on Gucci clothes everywhere, or, you know, all these things that call themselves luxury. The Four Seasons is understated. It has a simple logo, but you go in there and there's no bells and whistles screaming, we're fancy.
Yes.
It's this quiet delivery. And that's kind of really
It's true
resonates
wealth.
with me.
Wealth whispers, money screams.
But wealth, but it's delivery that could be done at every level. So Chick-fil-A does it at its level.
Yeah.
Right? Wealth is in there, but at what you're trying to deliver to your customer, Chick-fil-A does the same thing as Four Seasons does. Trader Joe's kind of does the same thing. They deliver what their promise is with precision. And that's what I love about it. Whereas the Four Seasons delivers an experience like that.
I get what you're saying, but in digging into the book, like for example, when they took over like the Pierre property in New York, the standard in 5-star hotel or hospitality is 1 employee for every guest. They did 3 employees for every guest, but the price point for the Pierre versus the other 5-star properties was comparable. So they take on way more costs.
Yeah, but that's like Chick-fil-A and Church's Chicken, right? Like there's a standard in the industry, but Chick-fil-A invests way more in delivering fresh ingredients. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just because I don't want to say that only wealthy people can do this. Whatever business you're working in, or
No, I was saying it's wealth and experience. Like their Gucci tracksuit with Gucci's all over it is like
cheesy.
It's cheesy. It's just money. Like
my friend, you know who you're watching this. You know I'm talking to you. Stop with the Gucci tracksuits. It looks ridiculous.
But it to me is when you use the saying of like wealth whispers and money screams, like a Gucci tracksuit, like that's not a brand. Like that's just a logo being slapped on it. That's it. It's fake.
You know what I think that's really relevant too, is in watches. Like I like good watches. I don't have one on today, but an amazing watch is the product of a century of watchmakers, like making it better and more precise. And so when you get into a Swiss watch, you're actually paying for like almost a century of focus on making really complex mechanisms. But then you can go to the airport duty free and you buy a watch that says Cartier or Gucci on it. You're buying a piece of crap that's battery operated with a brand on it.
Yeah.
Like there's almost nothing that signals that you don't really understand value when you buy something that you just slap a brand on something that's junk. Like
so true.
A Swiss watch is world class.
Yep.
Four Seasons is world class. But I didn't read that book. What else did you like from it?
The Four Seasons experience is so interesting, and I wanted to do a case study video on it because there's so much that business owners and branding and marketing experts can learn from the Four Seasons story. Because I'm neck deep right now in defining what a brand is, and the more and more I dig into it, I realize how important the aspect of time is in becoming a brand that's great. And it's what's allowed me to break down kind of these 3 levels of branding, because every great brand goes through the 3 levels of branding, but they rise through the ranks within different amounts of time.
Yeah, what I love about this too is this is kind of original content I feel you've come up with in writing your book and working with so many different companies is this.
And case studies.
Yeah, like this 3 levels of brand, because every company has a brand.
Yeah.
Right? But that brand is new. A lot of them are new and they never really progress beyond being the opinion of the business owner. It's like, I like this color, I'm going to put that up there. I like this name, we're going to call it this. And this is my brand. Actually,
the reason why I got into the 3 levels of branding is I got so frustrated with businesses improperly benchmarking themselves and being absolutely delusional to who they think their competitor is. And not all brands are created equally. Like we had a client that was in the Tex-Mex space, and they're doing well, you know, by sales and by how many locations they have. In fact, they are a category leader by how many locations they have in Canada. But who they benchmarked as their competitor was Chipotle. And that's a delusional benchmark, because Chipotle is a 30-year-old business, was established in 1993, was purchased by McDonald's when it already had 18 locations, and was the reason why Tex-Mex, the fast food restaurants, became mainstream. And that's why McDonald's acquired it, because 30 years ago, it was pretty much burgers and fries and fried chicken as your option through the drive-through. And they diversified the menu option because of how big Tex-Mex was within southern states. And it became an easy thing that you could grab and go. And then it became a drive-through offering. So Chipotle's been in the making for 30 years.
I didn't know McDonald's bought them. Actually, that was a brilliant move by them.
1998,
because it's so replicable.
And that's why
deliverable.
Chipotle became incredible, is because McDonald's has the SOPs, and McDonald's actually also plays a huge role in the Four Seasons story, and which I'll get into. But the reason why I got into this branding is I'm sitting in these meetings with these sizably big brands, and they're saying that their competitor is Chipotle. But Chipotle is not their competitor. Anyone that is thinking of going to get their food is not even thinking about Chipotle being an alternative option. Like, Chipotle is in the running for like Sweet Greens and like McDonald's and Chick-fil-A. Like, it's in brands, not in just Tex-Mex category. It's in because of their exposure, size, and brand weight. This client would be with like mom and pop locations in like random strip malls in parts of Canada that you've never heard of. Like, it's not a one-to-one. So that's why I developed the 3 levels of branding. And the reason where that delusion also plays into it is this client was only 8 years old. And you can't be a great brand when you're 8 years old.
Yeah. In certain market segments too, because the time gap is different in certain markets. But yeah, like, you have to at least put the time in to be a great brand. But have you explained the 3 stages of the brand?
I can do that really quickly before we get into the case study. So a brand is a business that has a logo, and can be considered a brand by the standard of having a visual identity and a concept within a customer's mind. But it is at the lowest end. So this is like a local manufacturer, or maybe your dentist office, or a coffee cafe down the street, or a small real estate brokerage. Like, they have a brand, right? But they're not leaning into their branding as a differentiator for why you use them.
You know how I see it? I think I mentioned it, but it's like, it exists in my mind. But at some point, if I go there and I start to really like the fries, now when I talk to somebody, I go, XYZ restaurant has amazing fries. Now it's kind of a good brand.
And like, they're owned by, this family that is from wherever. There's a story to it, and you can experience consistency. Yeah, and you can experience consistency and a good experience. Good brands are also brands that are doing great things, like what I'm about to describe what a great brand is, but they're too young or new in market. So a lot of like a Warby Parker, or I'm trying to think of other like new brands that have popped up, like some like, a Summer Fridays.
No, but I also like the Chick-fil-A, because I just read that book.
But they're a great brand.
No, but they were a good brand.
They were a good brand for a long time. Yes.
For 2 decades, Chick-fil-A was just known as having great, fresh ingredients. And so they were a good brand, and they just focused on always becoming better at delivering.
And that's the Four Seasons story, right? Like, they were a good brand for a long time, until they reached this certain tipping point where their product was so great, their story was so fantastic, and they were consistent over an amount of time through millions of a repeatable experience, that they crossed the chasm into great.
This is fascinating for me, because I think we're actually like discovering stuff about branding live as we talk about it. Because what strikes me now, having discussed it, is you become a good brand, and you can fail to become a great brand. And I think a lot of the companies that fail to become a great brand, they lose the plot, and they stop focusing on delivery and performance.
They stop the obsession over like experience and consistency. Is an art, and it's not something that is like formulaic. It's an actual obsession.
Because in the Chick-fil-A book, I think it was in the 90s, their competition, Boston Chicken, went public, raised like $50 million and opened all these stores. And they had a meeting, Chick-fil-A, we need to grow just for growth sakes. And they said, no, we're not going to grow for growth sakes. We're going to double down on having the best experience. And 6 years later, that company's bankrupt, and they've expanded, right? And so they became...
And the reason why I'm digging into more and more case studies, like this timeline and the 4 pillars are truly universal. Like I've read now the story of hundreds of great brands. Like I've spent the last few years obsessed with this, and every single one, it takes time. You can't speed up time. Even for brands in technology, even like e-com brands, good brands can do well. But to become great is the same thing as like winning an Olympic medal. Like you have to do the reps.
Look, this should be listened to a lot of people who sit on boards, because I've been on boards of companies that didn't do well. And it's because they fixated on growth and they forgot that you have to deliver.
Yeah.
And you have to be obsessed with the delivery of the best product.
You have to be obsessed with the reps, because every category you get into that's higher. That's why I use the Olympic analogy. You can be really good in your state in your NCAA and be the top of your class. And then when you enter into that next arena, to be good is now benchmarked to within a bigger roster.
And the scale, the difference between a gold medal and fourth place is like 0.1 of a second.
Yes.
Right. So that extra little bit is so much harder to get. So
Yes.
you can get good growth early when you're in the good brand phase. When you're going from brand to good brand, you're growing, like you're seeing measurable results. But to get to a great brand, you have to put in the reps for a decade to get that last 5%
Yes.
that puts you over the line.
And for you to change a generation, like for you to have a legacy, like that is truly greatness, right? Like that's not goodness, right? And to be good for a few years, like there's tons of brands throughout both of our childhoods and throughout both of our lives overlapped that and didn't overlap, that didn't last, right? And to be an Etch-a-Sketch, like you have to do something different than Silly Bands, you know, and it's like, it's where branding becomes an art. So the Four Seasons story, what it makes it so brilliant is Isidore Sharp was the product of two immigrants that worked very hard. His father owned a construction company, and Isidore, from effectively adolescence, learned how to build homes and was a construction worker. He was a contractor. He owned a construction company. One of the financiers for his father, he grew up in Toronto. One of the financiers for his father realized that Isidore actually had brains and said, well, why don't you start basically running these job productions? Come on the business side, stop working with your hands. But he had spent years building, digging ditches, like understanding that you have to measure twice and do it once. And he even has stories of like his father watching him pour stairs, realizing every step of the way he was building the stairs incorrectly, sat there silently so that he could see at the end that his bottom step was way too small, and he had to like basically demolish the whole thing and start fresh. But they were poor. They grew up where every single dollar mattered, and he had an obsessive attention to detail. And he basically got into the hospitality business by accident. He had, while they were kind of building these like, I guess like low rise kind of apartment buildings, they naturally came across hospitality, and he decided to kind of create a hotel that he wanted to be the first 5-star hotel experience in the West End of Toronto in Jarvis.
Was it called Four Seasons from the start?
The Four Seasons Motor Inn.
From the start.
Yeah. And the Jarvis Motor Inn, there ended up actually being like a young starlet that like walked in the front door within like the first week of it opening, completely like stripped naked, did like 2 laps of the pool, came out, put her clothes back on, and then like left the hotel, and it like made the CBC like front page.
That wasn't like guerrilla marketing?
No. And he thought it was the best. That's when he actually really realized that PR was such a powerful thing, because like that headline created
like
interest.
Guerrilla PR.
Well, especially for the time, because it was like in the 60s. So it was kind of like as like female progressive norms were changing. And so it made a lot of splash. But even him getting this piece of property on Jarvis was a big risk at the time, because it was kind of a rougher part of Toronto. Previously, it's where like the Macy's and the Seagrams had lived. So it once was a higher end part of town, but then it kind of went through a rough patch, and then it was regentrified. And the Four Seasons Motor Inn was kind of a part of that gentrification. But from the get-go, he wanted it to be luxury, and there wasn't a justification for luxury travel at the time that he started investing in it. it was a massive risk, but he realized as he was traveling that there wasn't anyone filling the gap of true luxury travel or stay. And he wanted to he wanted to fill that gap and offer it to the Canadian market because he foresaw with the war ending, more travel opening up. And he thought that more people with money, because there was more immigration happening in Canada post-war, people were going back to work, people were starting to spend more money. He could foresee that things were changing. He thought that luxury was going to open up.
You know what I think happens when they spend the time doing the reps fixated on service? What you hear from people who aren't succeeding is, oh, we can't afford to do that type of service. But it's like when you become really good at something, it's not as expensive to do it.
Yep.
Like when you have the SOPs, and because they focus so much on delivering service, they deliver a level of service that's actually not that much more expensive because they're so good at it. You know what I mean? Like it's like if you become so good at golf, it looks effortless. You know, and I think people say, oh, we could never afford to do that. But
well, that's what's so interesting is a part of the negotiation that he had to do with the financiers, they wanted to open up 330 room hotel, and they had this whole algorithm of like the price point per night and like how much you would make. And he wanted to cut it down to 232 rooms. So cut it down by 100 rooms, but increase the experience so that there was less people, but it was a better stay. And at the time, like that justification, like it didn't make sense. Like the concept of what he wanted to bring to the world had not existed. So these financiers, and he had no money. So these financiers, he was flying back and forth from London, England, trying to get financing. And it took months of meeting them for them to basically give them the money. And in the end, when he was speaking with this Duke that ended up lending him the money, he said, you know, we didn't actually believe in the concept, but we believed in you. And because he was so passionate about the idea and what he had proven before that, like his track record in getting businesses done on the exact quote, that he was so obsessive with every single quote, like during the design phase, and making sure that everything would stay within budget and that the design was flawless.
He intuitively kind of knew, and it's interesting for people who are looking to sell products, right? Selling to the rich in some cases can be easier than selling to the masses.
Yeah.
Because a number that looks really expensive to the masses, the wealthy think more in terms of time and convenience, like when they have more than enough money. And so people didn't understand that, but by providing an experience that was so accommodating to what a wealthier traveler wanted and needed, they were actually making their life so much better that the price point didn't matter.
No, and that was their story with how they survived over time, is like every recession that hit, the Four Seasons didn't cut back on staffing or experience because to the wealthier traveler, that experience actually mattered more. So they were working harder, they were working longer, they were working more. So they needed that 5-star experience even more than when times were good. And they were willing to pay for that experience because of basically them burning themselves out. So their vacation properties did well, not at the same rate, but they still were able to survive because people needed a break. And they justified doing a break at the highest level through all of them, because they went through all of the recessions. They've been in business since the 60s. So since the 60s, every economic collapse, they've seen it through.
I like that idea of why people will pay that price. It's because they execute at such a high level. Anyhow,
It's really interesting because they earned their reputation, and that the Four Seasons is a case study of greatness isn't given, it's earned.
Yeah.
It can't be bought.
Yeah. Somebody tries to copy them, they can't get tons of funding, hire people from a bunch of other hotels and try and execute. Because this organization has built SOPs like an elite unit, like any elite team has done.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to replicate without putting the time in.
And what's interesting is I find people look at brands in a vacuum. And they want to replicate where a brand is today. And that's why the Four Seasons story is so interesting. Like even looking at, so as I started to, their story is like literally brick by brick. Like but by the time that Isidore Sharp was, I think it was like he was 50, he had only had like 5 properties under his belt. And it was kind of, it compounded, right? Like once they kind of had proven it, the industry was small enough that people started realizing and better property opportunities came up and their SOPs improved. But the obsession from property 1 to property 6 is so fascinating. So one of the things that Isidore Sharp did that was really interesting is he made a point of realizing that every hotel talked about providing a great experience, but it was a marketing play. And he wanted the Four Seasons experience to be an experience, not a marketing headline. So they didn't even invest in branding or PR until much later when the brand was way more established. Like we're talking like 90s. They didn't start investing in PR.
Is it interesting if I can jump in? It's actually fascinating because I think we sing it, the difference between a public company and a private company. Once a company goes public, the shareholders, board members, they're interested in revenue.
Yeah.
So they have a good brand, and then they want to massage things to get better numbers, right? And so they can do that through marketing, right? They spend a lot on marketing, but then they neglect the brand, and the brand is what creates that legacy.
Yeah.
Right. And the brand a private company can focus on, just like what Four Seasons did. Chick-fil-A did the same thing by focusing on delivery, not growth.
It's a different level of control.
Yeah.
Right. And he didn't allow marketing to manufacture a message. Like they were the first hotel to invest in a 5-star concierge service that we know today. Like basically the Four Seasons employees were allowed to execute anything under $500 without asking. So if their guest wanted a new mattress, like they would change in the mattress. Like if they wanted, there was an example of like a parliamentary leader who they called and they asked why the guest stopped staying at their property. And their secretary said, he says he doesn't like the pillows and that's why he started staying at this other location. They went and found out what pillows the other hotel were using, went and bought pillows and called him back and had him stay. And they had specific pillows in a closet for this guest, so they could provide the pillows, even the mattresses.
That would be the next level of service if somebody at the Four Seasons was listening at some point. Is some people like a firm pillow, some people like a memory foam pillow.
No, they do this. They have a pillow option. No, you call and request.
In a profile, but even in your profile, right? And so because most hotels put the same pillow in every room.
Yes.
Right, the same comforter. But if they knew I was coming and wherever I went, they had the same type of pillows that I liked. So they have that now.
No, they've had it for 40 years.
Okay.
You just have to tell them. Yeah. If you want the mini bar, if you want it to only be water because you don't want to be tempted with snacks, they will change out the mini bar for water.
But it should be in a profile now, not calling them. So
no, it is a profile. Yeah, okay. It is a profile.
Do I have one?
But you haven't told them.
Okay.
They can't at the rate that they have got guests every day to be like sending you a text before you show up. But as soon as you communicate to them, you want your shoes shined. They were the first hotel to start shining shoes complimentary. They were the first.
The dog thing, it's amazing. Like
they were the first hotel. So they had some guests that had said that they wanted a more comfier mattress. So they stock separate mattresses and they bring mattresses upstairs to switch out the mattress.
Firmness, that's cool.
For a guest. So far as they also they searched the world for the comfiest mattress and they found it in Germany and placed the largest mattress order so that all of the properties have the best mattress. And that's where people talk about how comfortable the bed is. The robes cost $250 a piece. And if you take it home with you, they don't charge you. Like the Four Seasons experience is one of comfort, and it wasn't done by accident.
You know why it's good about that? That $250, that robe, like you talk about that robe. If ever anybody even comes to your house and gets a chance to see it, like you're proud of that Four Seasons robe because it's so good. Like it actually was, it's actually, when you don't look at it through the eyes of a bean counter MBA, who would freak out that a $250 robe was gone. But that's the difference between a good brand and a great brand, because a great brand knows there's a long-term value if somebody is taking your robe like that.
And they're investing in your brand. They're going to stay with you many times over.
Even with the dog, they ask your dog's name, and then they make a dish with your dog's name on it. You know, when you go in there, it's amazing.
Yeah. Well, when we stayed there in Montreal, they knew that the dog was coming, and we came in. There's like a dog bed. There's like a dog food tray, it was a dog treats were set up for her. It was above and beyond experience. They were also the first hotel that set up an emergency line. So basically they had this phone line set up that in all the major kind of points of service. So if they overheard like a customer had a bad experience, like their car wasn't ready for them at valet, or they didn't enjoy their room, or basically employees were instructed to pick up this emergency line, and it recorded a message for the general manager. So the general manager at several points throughout the day basically picks up the phone
Smart.
and listens to what the concern is, so that they can go and deal with it themselves. And this was before the internet. So now with the internet, they basically have like a CRM system that identifies through color coding, like issue, how is it dealt with, what options are there for resolution, did the customer accept it, where is the customer at? So they like triage the concern points so that they can deal with it appropriately.
And what that does in the organization is, because they've delegated authority down to the lowest level possible, problems can be solved. And that's a sign of a great brand or a great organization.
And speed of response.
Because the lowest level of employee understands the intent and can fix it. Because there's nothing more frustrating than going to somebody that tries to pretend it's a great brand, and you speak to somebody at the organization and you're like, you know what? I bet you if your CEO knew what I was saying right now, they would be furious that you're not fixing it. But they say, sorry, we can't do that, sir.
No, but I would say it's even further than that. The issue you often experience with luxury is it's not good enough, but you're dealing with it with someone that isn't a decision maker. And then you're in this uncomfortable position where you feel like you now need to go and complain to someone that can do it. And you're straddling with the like, I don't want free shit. I do want you to know with what's happened. And you either don't say anything at all and you don't come back again, or you say something and you often will get it, dealt with, but you're in this position where you now feel like you're kind of complaining. And for a customer like us, like we don't like doing that. But at the Four Seasons, when every person is instructed to act when a concern is realized, there's a speed within that company where the customer feels like they're truly being cared for.
Can I give you an example I experienced? It's not quite as luxury, but I'm getting into like organic fabrics, the organic cotton and the bamboo as a health thing. And I had placed an order with this company called Danish Endurance, a cool company in Denmark that makes really good, healthy fabrics for athletic people. And I placed the order, and it came in this cool packaging that was environmental. But what I didn't know is that a large European is actually a medium in the US. Right. And I had spent a lot on a bunch of pairs of underwear, and I called them up and I said, look, can I ship these back to you? Right. Or can I whatever? And they're like, no, sir, we should have been clearer on our website. We want to have more customers in North America. We're going to send you 8 pairs replacement of the size you need right away. I go, like, should I send these back? They're like, no, keep them. And I later went and bought more stuff from them. It was just such a pleasant experience.
Totally.
Right. It just, now I'm talking about it. But you would have had somebody on customer service say, sorry, sir, there's no refunds on transatlantic. You know what I mean? Like that, it's so short-sighted.
No, but that's a great example of the Four Seasons does it at the highest end in their luxury. Mm-hmm. But businesses listening to this that are like, hey, I'm not the Four Seasons, I can't afford it. You still can provide a great experience at any price point. And an example I used, like the Danish Endurance is a great example because they're not expensive, but they're still providing a great experience. And to be a great brand, you don't have to be at the highest level of luxury. But the Four Seasons is just a good example of a brand that hits it so well. But other brands can learn from the Four Seasons at a different price point. Yeah. And that's what this case study is about. Also, another thing that I found so interesting about the Four Seasons story is how obsessed Isidore Sharp was with McDonald's. So what he loved the most about McDonald's in the 70s is that they understood that quality and consistency equaled value. So McDonald's became such a massive brand because it represented consistency. You knew what you were going to expect, and it was the same every single time. And that quality and consistency created a great brand in the customer's mind because it didn't result in anxiety.
Takes away the friction of making the buying
The
decision.
stress.
Yeah.
You know exactly what you're going to get every single time. And at the rate and the scale that McDonald's was growing and where it was in the 70s, Isidore Sharp was fascinated by it. So he called up the CEO of McDonald's Canada and he sat in their training sessions. And what he found fascinating
That's amazing.
is that his biggest takeaway, which I found so interesting, is that at that time, McDonald's was changing their TV ad creative every single month, but their training videos on their weekly training sessions looked like it was 20 years old. Because what they had done in their training was timeless. They had created ironclad system operating procedures that were replicable and worked in every single market and became the gold standard for training. My first job was at McDonald's, and it was the best training that I ever received. So Isidore Sharp became obsessed with the McDonald's training protocols, and he called up his C-suite team and he said, guys, you have to come in and see this. We have to use what McDonald's has done and put it into our brand so that we can scale the Four Seasons in our experience at a world stage. So at this point, it's interesting. They had won the operating contract for the Pierre, which at the time was the nicest hotel in New York City. And New York City was the gold standard for operating hotels at that time. And at the time, 5-star hotels, their standard was 1 employee for every guest. That was like a 5-star standard. At the St. Pierre, they did 3 employees for every guest. And their expectation for quality and their customer service, like that's really where they became a good brand from a brand, because it put them on a world stage because of how cosmopolitan and international the St. Pierre was. And it attracted all the top celebrities. But in order for them to get to a great brand is when they used the McDonald's training system, and his C-suite team laughed at him because they said at the Four Seasons, we're a filet mignon.
Yeah.
McDonald's is, it's a cheap burger and fries.
Yeah.
And Isidore Sharp could see that it wasn't about what they were selling. It's how they were able to sell it to provide value to the customer. And that was his core takeaway, as he said, consistency and experience is value.
It has a military relation as well. It's because the top training is
replicable.
Yeah, and you fixate on the best training and the highest standards, right? You just don't say, "Oh, we're luxury, so we can just bring," you know what I mean? No, you pay attention to the tiny details.
It has to be that.
Because the tiny details are the difference between mission success and mission failure in a military operation, and also in a high-end hotel where if the customer is not happy, they're not going to tell you sometimes. You're just going to lose them forever.
Yes.
So the tiny details are critical for mission success, and
Yes.
you can't manage the tiny details without exceptional training.
But that's also what makes the Four Seasons a great brand. And this is what most business owners miss, is that a good brand requires a good experience and consistency. You need to invest in experience, and you need to surpass what your customer's expectation is of your brand, because that is what separates you from the competition. It's not enough to have a good product, and it's not enough to have a good story. You have to invest in the experience, and you have to be consistent.
Can I do a mini rant too, just on one thing? I think, like, if you're pricing yourself as a great establishment, and to me it's restaurants, which I pay attention to, like, I can't believe how many times I go into a restaurant that has a higher price point but cheapens out on napkins. Like, there's nothing worse in my experience than a paper napkin. But somebody has told them they save money. Like,
but they don't have a good experience.
Yeah.
Like if you're not investing in the napkin, there's other areas you're not investing in.
Yeah.
Like their food isn't then through the roof. Their experience
I've
isn't
been in
through
some
the
places
roof.
that have good, like great food, but they're not going to become what they could become because the napkin has a disproportionate effect. How many times do you touch it during your meal, right? And it's there for me, and I just can't stand going into an expensive restaurant and having a crappy napkin. Like people have to. That's where it comes to your experience level. They're not paying attention to every step of the experience.
Well, they just don't care enough.
Yeah.
No.
Or they're cheap, but they're providing good value. Like there's a lot of kind of restaurants where the owner has been frugal, but they can't get to the next level because they're cheap at some areas that they shouldn't be in.
Well, I get what you're saying. I think though for the average person though listening to this, they feel like they've looked at the napkin. You know, like they feel like they've got a good experience and they don't know where they can make it better. And that's where when I talk about, like, you know, the $300 million Best Buy button, where when Best Buy increased their sales by $300 million because they tested out having a guest checkout button instead of having to create an account. And before that guest checkout, which is now universal on websites, you had to create an account before checking out. And that friction piece is what stopped so many sales. Most businesses aren't thinking in terms of the guest checkout button, right? And that's the difference of an experience that will transform your business. And it's things outside of, like, the basic, the obvious, you have to be focused on in order to be a good brand. But to get to the great brand, you have to be like Isidore Sharp, sitting in McDonald's training systems and not feeling like you're too good to be taking your training protocol and your standard to the next level. And what's interesting is the Four Seasons boasts that they don't hire for looks. They hire for a standard. So it does. If you lined up a row of Four Seasons employees, they're not the same shape, size, or color because they can't be. It has to be on a standard of care. And that's what's so interesting of why the Four Seasons has been so successful, is because their training was so rigorous and so systematized. They could go into emerging economies and train people with almost no experience or education because it was so dogmatic. Like, it was just, here is the playbook. They actually preferred to not hire people in hospitality. Like, they transformed Nevis. Nevis was the reason they put Nevis on the map.
St. Kitts and Nevis.
Yeah, it's because of the Four Seasons property. Prior to them going there was 3,000 people that lived on the island. They were literate because St. Kitts is invested in literacy in their education, but none had experience in hospitality. And when they opened their property on Nevis, even their government officials asked for jobs at the Four Seasons because it became a part of the community. It's
so cool.
It gave them purpose and structure, and it's what truly transformed that island. Same with the Maldives.
Yeah, it's interesting.
They also transformed. They made the Maldives what it is today.
But it's interesting because, like, they can train locals who care, but the people who succeed are the people who resonate with that philosophy too, right?
Yes.
So if somebody is like, hey, I'm all that in a bag of chips, like, I'm good looking, just hire me because I'm good looking, they're not going to care about service.
No.
And so they get deselected.
Yes.
Right? But the way that they've done it, because it's such a fixation on service, there are some humans that love to be great at their job.
To serve.
Yeah, and the training they can see makes them great at their job.
Yeah.
And so they become proud. And now you have a sense of team pride that's spectacular. Great case study.
And that's what, as a wrap-up point, what was the last 2 points for this, the Four Seasons cared as much about employee unhappiness as they did about customer unhappiness. So if there was ever an issue within the system or the management, it was addressed in the same fashion that a customer's unhappiness was. Isidore Sharp's ethos and for the brand was the golden rule. Do unto others as you would do unto yourself. And they had established the golden rule because it was found universally in almost all religions. So anywhere they went in the world, their group of people could resonate with that concept. And when they first introduced it, a lot of the managers actually, they didn't think that they would, or a lot of the C-suite didn't think the business would incorporate it because it was very like top down. Like there wasn't that kind of equal or mutual respect. And basically Isidore Sharp weeded it out. Anyone that didn't live by that mantra had to go. And it's what transformed the business. So that when, as my second point, there was only one time in the Four Seasons history, it was after 9/11, where they actually had to let go of some staff because with travel hurting them so badly, they were impacted by stays. And a lot of employees that were let go continued to work for free because of how much they cared about and respected the place in which they worked. To go back to your point on, like, they actually lived to serve.
I wonder now that I'm thinking back to the White Lotus, which showcase these beautiful properties, but the reason why they would not allow them to use the Four Seasons logo is because the staff at those properties
We're
did
like
not
fucking off.
embody
Yeah,
did not embody the Four Seasons. So indirectly they benefit because people are like, I want that location, but they weren't, tainted by the staff kind of thing because they were totally different than the staff in that show.
And you bring up another great point. What the White Lotus did so well is showcase, and I suspect the other locations, because the Four Seasons is also known for its real estate. Like it has really some of the finest real estate in the world that you can stay at with great experience. Like it really makes it a 10 out of 10. Like we stayed at the Kyoto Four Seasons, and it's like a 3,000-year-old like Japanese Zen garden, like crazy history. But why the Four Seasons kind of is this like full experience is because Isidore Sharp was a builder. He understood the attention to detail. He understood how to build a proper building from the ground up. He was in real estate.
Understood location.
So he could procure great real estate. He was a great people person because he started working very young and understand how to negotiate a deal.
Didn't take himself too seriously, which is why he'd go to McDonald's and learn.
Didn't take himself too seriously and was fixated on experience because he understood how important it was to him and his wife when they went on their first honeymoon to like finally go to a hotel and what that meant and looked like. And what it comes down to is the Four Seasons is truly a lifetime achievement. And you can't buy it. You can't rush it. Like it took decades to achieve its level of greatness. And it took an obsession in every area of that business in order for it to be what it is. And when you read every single case story, Trader Joe's, exact same thing. Joe Coulombe started in the grocery industry when he got out of university. Same thing with Steve Jobs and with Bill Gates. Like they're obsessed with the industry in which their brand builds and becomes. So that is something that can't be manufactured. It's something that actually has to it exists within you and come through the brand.
Every great organization, whether it's military, business, sports, focuses on execution and performance. Not about ego, not about the nonsense. Focuses on execution and performance.
And doing the reps until the last competition.